Hi everybody, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and together we are ThinkerThemer. We review games from two different perspectives. I'm all about the mechanics and Maggie is all about the theme. Today we are previewing for you the latest prototype, Avalon, the Riven Veil, from Jamie Jolie, the designer, who also has the publishing company Shadowborn Games. Now this is the company that did Oathsworn, if you bought into that huge Kickstarter that we also bought into and I have not yet played. So we are actually getting Avalon to the table before Oathsworn, but we're going to let you know what we think.
So in Avalon, the Riven Veil, we are going to be leading our faction to explore the mists of Avalon, gather artifacts, bond beasts, and also, very importantly, prepare for war. And what are we battling for? Well, things like the Holy Grail and Excalibur, because we are, after all, in a King Arthur setting.
Now, before we get into how this game plays, please remember that this is a prototype, so anything that I'm about to say, as well as all of the components, are of course subject to change. But with that out of the way, this is the world of Avalon. It is this circular board with all of these modular pieces. These modular pieces are randomized at the start of every round, and when we move our leader throughout the world, we're going to be able to explore these regions by flipping them over and revealing not only what type of region they are, but also the number of points that they're going to be worth in the area majority game that is the war. The other things that you're going to be uncovering along the way are artifacts that you can equip to the different members of your faction to give them new abilities and skills, as well as these different beasts. Now, the beasts in Avalon are these different creatures that you're going to be able to bid on to claim them as your own by adding one of your flags, and now they're going to act as part of my faction and give strength to areas where I'm trying to win in the area majority game. Now, each game consists of 2 or 3 seasons, and in every season, you're going to be preparing for the war. And in order to prepare for the war, you're really trying to move all the members of your faction out across the board in order to vie for majority in these different areas, which are going to give you victory points, which of course is going to help you win the game. Along the way, you're also going to be collecting points on the favor track, which is going to give you some bonuses along the way, as well as an advantage in the war if you're able to be the person that's the furthest along on that track, as well as faction power, which is going to give you abilities that you can use whenever you like on your turn, once off during the round, in order to help you take an action or get some victory points. But the majority of the round in the preparation phase is spent playing cards out of your hand. And this is done simultaneously across all players. And what you're basically doing is you're choosing between one of 4 different types of cards or actions to play down. The first type of card is the deploy card, which is the green suited card. When you play one of these cards, it's going to help you move your faction pieces out onto the board. And you're going to be able to do that from areas where you have a settlement or from the coastal region. So you have to move your pieces essentially from the outside in. The second type of card is a move card, and it does exactly that. It helps you move your faction pieces around to adjacent areas on the board in order to spread out as much as possible. The third type of card are settlement cards, and when you play these cards, they're going to allow you to take settlements from your player board, place them out into the world of Avalon, and they give you some victory points as income, as well as 2 warriors that are going to give you some ongoing presence in that region. And the final type of card are combat cards, the red cards. And these cards are only really useful to you during the war, but you want to try and collect and hang on to these in your hand so that you have them ready for the next phase of the game. Now, the tension in this game comes into play from a hand management perspective, because in order to play these cards, you need to be able to discard a certain number of cards depending on how powerful that action is. So for example, this card is telling me a number of things. It's telling me that when I play this card, I'm going to be able to do the action that's written on the card. But in order to play it, I need to pay 3 cards unless I decide to lose victory points instead. So the cards sometimes give you a way that you can spend fewer cards in order to activate them. But essentially, the way that this plays out is that all players have one of these cards in their hand that acts as a barrier between the cards that they're choosing choosing to play this round and the cards that they're choosing to keep in their hand. So for example, if I was to play this card and I needed to discard 3 cards in order to do so, I would slot this card in here and then hide that away, and then we all simultaneously reveal the cards that we're playing this round. Now there's also an initiative, so the player who plays the card with the highest number is going to go first, and that's going to dictate turn order. But at any time, if you decide that you no longer want to play the card that's on top, you can simply turn it over, return all the cards to your hand, and play one of the basic actions. After we finish our turn in any given round, we're allowed to draw 2 cards from any of the 4 decks that we choose. And we're going to do this 3 times each, so play 3 cards out of our hand every season before we start the war. Now the war is simply going around each of the regions from outside in to work out who has the most strength there, and then everybody has the opportunity to play a battle plan. Now the battle plan is key because it's those important combat cards that I mentioned when we were going through the cards. These battle plans you can play, they do have a cost associated with them, but for example, this one is free and it can give me up to an additional 8 strength in that region, but I'm going to have to risk it in order to get those 8 strength. And the way I'm going to risk that is on my turn, I have to draw from these decks and use the initiative shown on the cards to hopefully not go bust over 8. Anytime where I decide to stop, I can, and that's going to be the number that's going to be applied to my total strength in that region. However, if I bust, it's just going to be half of the amount of this battle plan strength. So in that case, if I bust, I would only get 4 additional strengths. So it's important to remember that even if you've got a lot of presence in a region, these battle plans can really make the difference in the war. Now there's a few other things going on. There's some catch-up mechanics, and there's these prophecy cards, which are public objectives, but we'll talk about those more as we get into our thoughts on the game. And the first thing that I want to talk about before we get into our preview and our thoughts on the game is that this was a bit of a compromised prototype. Not compromised, but it was a reduced set of the total game. And so we've only been able to play the short game, so 2 of the seasons out of 3. And also we've not been able to play the advanced mode, which is much more asymmetric in terms of the characters because there were some pieces missing from the prototype. So please bear that in mind when we talk about our opinions, because I do think that some of our opinions are a bit constrained by the prototype we've been sent.
So in spite of that, we did actually get to have a good sense of how the core mechanics work. And the main thing of this is this hand management. Pardon my voice, I'm sort of recovering from a cold, so I've got the loss of voice thing. I really enjoyed how this whole managing your hand and going, okay, well, what sequence of actions am I going to take? Which of these do I want to activate? And then is it worth the cost of losing all these other cards as a payment for that?
And we haven't played Oathsworn, but I think that clever card play is part of the battle mechanic in Oathsworn, because we did actually get to sit down with Jamie Jolly and he showed us how that...
At a Gen Con once.
At Gen Con, yeah. And he showed us how that played out. And I think that's what this game relies on quite heavily as well, is, taking it away from the dudes on a map or Ameritrash, as it's sometimes been called, that style of play, and trying to pull it a bit more into Euro strategy by relying heavily on this kind of element of assessing what is in your hand and working out the right sequence in which to play them in order to maximize, as I said, the cards that you need to spend out of your hand. And it's interesting because at the end of the round, you don't get to keep the cards in your hand, but you will get 1 victory point for every card left over. And also, you need to be thinking about the war, because you're going to have these battle plan cards that are also going to cost cards that you need to make sure you have in your hand. Otherwise, you're going to be a bit compromised in terms of where you're able to actually battle your opponents, because these battle plans, they do impact on the war quite significantly. So there's plenty to think about when you're thinking about how to plan out your hand, and the cards that you also need to draw back at the end of every turn. So, for example, if I'm thinking about, well, in my next turn, I really need to do some movement. Well, maybe I'm going to draw some movement cards, but every time I do that, I'm probably compromising on the number of battle plans that I'm going to be able to pick up before the end of the round.
Yeah, you also have so few like few cards that you get to play, that really adds to the tension of going, oh, do I want to get more people out, or do I want to move them around, or do I want to put a settlement? And hopefully I get a settlement card where maybe it also allows me to place people out on the map or get better synergies.
Now, the idea of hand management and spending cards in order to play cards, it's not necessarily a new idea. I do think it is interesting and my favorite element of this game in order, that thought process of strategically trying to work out how to play that. And it feels like something that's the thing that's within your own control in this style of game. But I do think that it's not as tense as it sounds, because at first it felt like, well, okay, I need to be really careful because this is my only hand of cards and I need to play out like this, then this, then this. But the reality is after every turn, you are picking up 2 more cards. And so it does give you new options every time. And they've made it even more forgiving by the fact that even after you've played a card down, you can kind of fake out your opponents, or you can change your mind at any time and turn it over to play one of the basic or standard actions, which allows you to essentially do any of these actions on a more basic, simplistic level. So of course you want to utilize the more powerful things that are on the cards, but worst comes to worst, you can kind of do that to get an action done.
In the basic game, there's also a lot of catch-up mechanics that also make it quite forgiving as well. So one of the things is you'll see that there's these stars all along the victory point track. And so often there'll be things that trigger you getting points for every star between you and the player that's sort of furthest ahead. The other thing is things like whenever there's any kind of tie break, it's usually going to be the person who's last. There's also this green knight that comes into play at the time where you decide, when you go into battle, whoever's sort of falling behind in points gets to essentially have this extra, very powerful warrior to send out and compete, and sometimes completely overturn what would have been a battle in an area.
And so, of course, you can remove some of those catch-up mechanics, and they allow you to do so in the more advanced variants of the game. But there's also a few others that are baked in, like when you go into the war phase and you're playing a battle plan, even if you go bust, you're still getting some strength. If you don't go bust, but you don't win, you get the cards back into your hand. So there's a lot of very forgiving elements in this game, which is quite interesting. And I think people will fall on one side of the camp versus the other as to whether that's for you, because a lot of people who play Euro style games don't like just essentially losing everything when they've worked so hard. And often it comes down to chance as well in war type games, which we'll get into in a moment. So I can see why they've done that, but it really does impact on the tension in the game. And sometimes it makes it feel like it doesn't even matter what I do because I'm still getting some points. And another great example of that is in each of these regions, there's going to be points awarded to the person who ultimately wins that region in the war. But the person who comes second gets half of the points.
Rounded up.
So this game is a little nice. And it's a little nice for my preferences because I feel like then sometimes I was like, well, I'll just move in there. I don't really want to be part of the battle, but I'll just come second and I'll get those points.
Look, I'll say I actually like that as someone who doesn't enjoy area majority, because I just find that so annoying and so that combative. It's like, at least it's like, that extra little nicety makes me go, okay, that's fine. I don't feel like I'm losing as much.
Now, everything you're doing in this game is preparing you for war in order to try and win these regions. So it would be remiss of us not to talk about how this war plays out, because as mentioned, you are relying on these battle plans. So as we go into the war and we're scoring a region, firstly, we're going to sum up all of the strength that each player has in that area. And that consists of, your different warriors. You've got the weaker kind of warriors. Then you have, what are these called thematically? Your champions. And then you have your lord as well. And now these are going to be worth different amounts of strength depending on the artifacts that you've been able to equip to them along the way. You're also going to get some strength if you've got a settlement in the area. So we sum all of that up. Then players have the opportunity to play battle plans out of their hand, as long as they have a hero, i.e. a non-warrior in that region, they're able to do so. So all players are going to simultaneously play one of these battle plans if they have it and pay the cards if there's a cost associated with it. And then in initiative order, the players are going to draw randomly from these decks and try not to go bust. So in this case, I'm trying for an extra 8 strength, and I'm going to continue turning over those cards until I feel safe to stop. And then I'm not going to reveal whether I've gone bust or not. The other players are going to have their opportunity to do that. And then for any player who hasn't gone bust, they're going to get the full amount. Players who have gone bust, they're going to get half of that amount. And we're going to track all of this on this strength tracker here. The person with the most strength is going to win the region. Now, this additional amount of points is extremely, in all of the games we've played this game a ton at different player counts. It's going to be extremely impactful on who wins the region. If you go bust, it's very problematic. Even if you've worked really hard, the maximum number of heroes and warriors that you can have in a region is 5. And so you can work really hard to get a lot of strength, beginning strength in there. But then we found that you can easily still lose if a player just has a really lucky draw of cards and hits the 10 or hits a 12 and then adds all of that strength while you've gone bust. And that is one element that I think actually detracts away from the satisfaction of the preparation phase, because in the preparation phase, I'm trying so hard to get as much strength as I can in each region. Some of the regions are associated with the artifacts, so you need to try and move a particular hero into that area so that they get extra strength. And so you're working really hard, and you get very few turns in the preparation phase.
And it's super swingy, when you're drawing cards, because the cards will go, the values are from 1 through 5. So often you're like, oh, I'm close, but it's like, there's no real way to like even card count, because you don't really know what cards have been played. And so it's really just blind luck.
It is blind luck. So essentially it's coming down to a dice roll. That is what it feels like. And at the end of the battle, sometimes I felt a little bit disappointed in the amount of work that I'd done. And then in subsequent rounds, I was thinking less about the amount of work that I want to put in here and more about the number of cards that I want to have to choose from.
Yeah, as a counter though, again, as someone who doesn't like that sort of level of battle tension, that makes it better for me, because I actually like the fact that I don't have to be so stressed about these battles, because they may not end up like, they can probably swing like either way.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, and there's other ways of getting points. So it's not like it's the only way that you're going to make progress in this game. So I actually like that relief of tension from that point.
And that's, we're going to agree to disagree on that, because for me, it got rid of like some of that strategic intent of like not wanting it to come down to luck, essentially. And I didn't feel like there were a lot of ways to mitigate against that. Like, sure, I could stop drawing cards, but if another player just gets really lucky, well, you're probably going to lose that region. But then at the same time, you still get half the points for that region. So I just felt like all of those things combined reduced the overall tension that I wanted to feel and I love to feel in all board games.
Whereas I got to be more cozy in a battle game.
There's a couple of other elements that I want to mention, one that involves luck and one that doesn't. The first one that involves a little bit of luck as well is that as you move your lord out through these areas, you're going to be able to explore, and you are basically recovering these regions from the mist. So when you move out there, you're able to turn it over and then reveal what that region is and how many points it's worth. And I do think that adds a little bit of unknown kind of luck to the game, which I really love exploration in games. I think the thing that is a little bit harder for me is that, some of the artifacts require your different heroes to be in certain types of regions. So you might have artifacts that relate to a forest region, but you don't know a forest region's going to be here until it's turned over, unless someone has built a settlement on it. And so because you only get 3 cards every round, should also mention an important factor is that at the end of every season, all of your pieces come back.
Yeah.
These are going to turn back over unless they have a settlement on it, but not just turn back over, be re-randomized as well from the setup. And so you have no idea when you're turning this over that it's going to be the region that you want or need. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the prophecy cards.
Yeah, those are interesting because they're kind of like, they're sort of a race objective, but again, you sort of, everyone can achieve them during the season.
Forgiving.
Very forgiving. The only difference between being first and being literally last is just that you get one extra bit of favor. But aside from that, you still get the full points. You still get a couple of other favors. So again, it's quite forgiving. I quite like that because it's like, I can just sort of be doing my own thing, and as long as I eventually hit it.
Yes.
And this track can be quite helpful, particularly as you start getting those either extra catch-up points or extra cards. But this faction power as well can be quite helpful in terms of allowing you to add in extra other actions throughout the season.
Yeah, I really like these prophecy cards as well. I always love a public objective, but this is, for example, have a unit in 5 different regions. It gives you something else to aim for other than just the war and preparing for that. So it's another way to collect additional points, which I really like. The other thing is, as you're moving up this favor track, the person who is the furthest along before the war gets Excalibur. And Excalibur is basically equipping your lord with an additional 2 strength that can be used to bolster your strength in the region where they end up.
I also like that there's always going to be the Holy Grail as one of the artifacts that is mixed in, lost in the mist. So you're always kind of looking out for it, because whoever actually gets it, one, you're going to get 10 victory points when you kind of win the battle in that area. But also you're going to carry that with you until it's taken away from you, and it's going to help you break ties. So it's a nice little like, no, I want it. No, I want it. But so it's like enough of an incentive, but it's not like, oh, well, if someone's got it, that's the end of the game, I guess. Yeah.
So let's talk about player count. Now, this game actually scales really easily. Essentially, you just put these blockers on that reduce the size of the board. And I was pretty surprised that this game plays fairly well at 2. We did play it at every player count, but at 2, it was surprisingly good for a game of this style. It just gets much better the more players you have, because it's area control, so you're vying over the different regions with more people.
There's also more things being discovered, so you might go, "Ooh, that's really interesting. Let me go over there."
Let me go over there.
When it's only 2, like you'll discover less. And the other thing is, like, when these non-lord characters move into any areas that are in the mist, unless a lord comes over and explores them, they get stuck there. Like, they can't actually move out. They're lost and wandering in the mist. And so it means that then you're not going to be able to kind of do battles there. So by having a 2-player, you're exploring fewer areas, and so there's less incentive to spread out unless you know that area is going to be explored.
Now, in playing this game, we of course have to compare it to the only game that we have in this genre in our collection, and that is Blood Rage. Now, we probably don't have a lot of experience with all of the breadth of these types of games, but I do think some people are going to make some comparisons to Blood Rage because of the card play, because of the fact that you're bonding with these creatures and upgrading your faction. It feels quite similar, but with Blood Rage, I think it is a slightly more strategic, because you're drafting the cards, so you have some strategic awareness of the cards that your opponents have in their hands. And you also have the private objectives. And so that gives you very clear other patterns that you're trying to create with your faction out on the board. That's going to help give you a lot of victory points. Whereas here, we really only have these prophecy objectives that are public knowledge. So there's nothing secretive going on there. And I do think this game forces you to engage, not necessarily in the war, but definitely in winning points in regions is particularly important. So this game, I do feel, is more focused on the area control element of the game, in spite of there being some similarities there.
Having said that, I'll say that the asymmetry of this, so if you're playing in the advanced game, I think that's probably where this game is going to truly shine, because then all the factions are going to have much more different sort of objectives kind of going in, but also it's going to be one of those games where if you have a play group that enjoys the setting, enjoys this gameplay, and you play it a lot, then it's like it's really looking at those little details of who played their faction the best.
Yeah, and I do feel like this game is more forgiving. So especially in this basic mode, it's going to be a nicer entry into the genre. Blood Rage, Maggie's been very sad. I've been very sad when something has happened and it's just been catastrophic for your game, and it feels so tightly wound that one or two of those things happening to you and you're like, I'm just now out of the race of this game. And that doesn't really feel like that here.
Less like table flipping moments with this one. I think.
And there's more ways to catch up. So that for some people is going to work a lot better. So is this a game for us, and might it be a game for you? Well, this game for me is not exactly as tight or strategic as I would want it to be. Having said that, I think I'm just craving more. And I agree with Maggie that if we were able to play more of the advanced game, when we have more of the components for that, perhaps, there would be more variability that would keep me more engaged. But as it is, the forgiving nature of it, I kind of wish the card element was a bit more tense, that there was more reward for like really setting yourself up well and using your cards wisely. If that was a little bit tighter, it'd be more for me. But in its current state, probably it's a bit friendly.
I like the friendliness. It makes for, usually as soon as I see that a game has area majority, I'm like, no, I'm out. I don't even want to try it. This game, I'll happily play it. Anytime that it's sort of out, I'm like, yeah, cool, let's do it. Having said that, in terms of like would it make me come back for more and more and more? The setting is not something that I'm super excited by. So it's like, it's still in the sort of, it's high fantasy, but it's like, I like it more than just like, I don't know, like the sort of, I don't even know what you call that. The other type of fantasy, I guess. But even then, it's just not, it's not my kind of
and actually I didn't mind
area.
the setting so much. It's, the high fantasy element of it that's kind of couched in reality and some of these like earthly stories. I like the creatures because they're not all horror and gore. And they're not all like scary creatures. Some are just like really beautiful.
And it's like a beautiful tree that is like an ancient,
exactly. And I actually, this game has made me want to paint again. Like when I looked at the miniatures, I was just like, these are so beautiful. They're very intricate. I think, even though this is a prototype, if it speaks to the quality of the miniatures, then I think they're going to be pretty good. So I would love to paint these as well. But anyway, that's all of our thoughts. We hope it was useful for you in terms of trying to work out if this is a game for you or not. If it was, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.